everyone. Welcome, welcome. I hope you can hear me okay. Yes, great. Thank you for making it from the fishbowl to here safely and in one piece. We're going to start our next discussion, and just to set this up, we're going to have the ability now to talk about architecture, space, cities, and what this space, the ICC, means as well. So I'll introduce to you my guests. To my immediate left is Stefan Schwatz. He's the Senator for Economics, Energy, and Public Enterprises. Next to Stefan is, you might remember from yesterday, Francesca Bria is here, an innovation economist and president of the Italian Innovation Fund. And next to Francesca, we have Niklas Maak, who is a professor for architecture at the Städel Schule in Frankfurt. So, a warm welcome to all three of you. So you're going to begin with a brief statement, I believe, talking about our topic. So, Stefan, I would like to ask you to begin.
First of all, I'm very, very happy to be here. And I'm very grateful to Burkhard Kieker, who organized this conference exactly at that place. And also thank you very much to Thomas Oberender, who gave us the proof that this building really works very well for not only events, but for people coming together, thinking about future, thinking about being creative, being innovative, having always arts and culture in mind. And I think this is a perfect place. And for me as a senator, who is also responsible for the future of this building, like congresses like the Q show to me that it is not acceptable to have this building in an offline status for a long time, so we want to revitalize it in the very near future.
Thank you very much. So this was a short but very effective statement. That's definitely what we want to hear. Maybe my first statement will be, I think what we are seeing during this conference, and I speak from my background, let's say I'm now leading the Italian National Innovation Fund, but I've been the Chief Technology and Digital Innovation Officer for the city of Barcelona for 5 years, and advising the United Nations and other cities, different cities, on these big transitions that we're facing, the digital transition and the ecological and green transition, and how we're bringing those together, because we need to put technology, digitalization at the service of people, the environment, and democracy, which is going to be, I think, the European way to be innovative and to look at the future. And in my experience working with cities, and that's why I think this conference is making a difference, is that because of the proximity of cities with citizens, they are, in a post-pandemic time, the right actors to recreate this relationship between people, communities, public spaces, and politics and democracy. So really revitalize democracy by trying to see how do we shape society and culture in these moments of shocks. Because, I mean, let's don't hide it, it's kind of very hard today to project a positive, green, democratic and digital future when we are living in a moment where if we go outside and speak with the general population, they will tell you that they are afraid because they cannot pay their energy bills, because of inflation, because of the lack of jobs. So it's a moment where we have strong uncertainty, also at the geopolitical level, where Europe, and in particular, I mean here, Germany has a very big task in setting the future. And where cities are, I think, this middle ground that help to find this new trust. Yes, new trust that help people, feel a bit more safe in projecting and shaping the future. And in spaces like this, I'm now also advising President von der Leyen in this working group on the new European Bauhaus. And this space, to me, resemble what the Bauhaus can be in the digital and green age. I mean, this kind of new type of public spaces, a new type of institutions that help citizens, but also policymakers and everyone, and I think it's a big cultural task, it's an educational task, to understand what it means to be fully, a citizen with full rights and capacity to shape our digital future. So understanding artificial intelligence, understanding the power of data, something in between really a library, a new form of museum for the future, and the data center. And I think he can elaborate about the data center. And by the way, and I close my first statement, I have to say that this conversation was meant to happen also with architect Rem Koolhaas, and that we're having a long conversation and some intense working, collaborative work with him as well to redefine this kind of new public spaces that put also the question of data and technology for the common good at the very center. So that's a little bit, I think, the framing for what high expectation there could be, taking, how this building is so important and exciting. Even to be here, it feels special.
Yes, I'm also very grateful to be here on this panel today because I think it is a great and important moment to rethink the future of structures like this building. We are in a situation in Berlin coming out of a crisis, the COVID crisis, but also a housing crisis. As everybody knows, we have a terrible housing shortage. At the same time, we have a situation where the idea of public space has to be redefined. And many spaces that we took for granted are under siege. So shopping malls are dying. Even office towers cannot be rent out anymore because digitalization has an enormous impact on these structures. And at the same time, we are not sure what a public space could be in the future. And I think Berlin has two fantastic structures who are standing empty and who could be the focal point of a new definition of social space and of togetherness and of redefining a city as a social construct differently than it has been done before. And I think it's Tempelhof who is standing empty, and it's this building standing empty. And I think both offer a great chance to really fundamentally redefine what a society could be in the future. And I think everybody knows and would agree upon the fact that mistakes have been made. We saw in Tempelhof that the space had been privatized, also with the help of the city, to accommodate a private collection from Bonn running a privately organized program in a situation where artists in Berlin, and we have to say that the city of Berlin always makes advertisements and touristic campaigns by referring to the artistic scene of Berlin. And of course, there are many artists, but these artists are living and producing under very precarious conditions. And I think it is time to see if we want to continue to have Berlin as a city who fosters art and who also keeps this creative potential of the artists in the city. We all have to offer them spaces to produce and spaces to display their work. And I think that was why it was so scandalous that the city handed over Tempelhof to a private person who showed his private taste instead of taking this as a starting point to discuss how the city could basically re-engage with its artistic scene, who is of course under siege because the prices of ateliers, the prices of rents are rocketing to a point that many artists can't afford the city anymore. So I think it's important also to keep that in mind, that if we talk about Tempelhof and the ICC especially, and if we say it has to relate somehow to culture, we have to precisely define what kind of culture do we want and how do we want to help these many artists and writers and other producers of culture to not only show things from time to time, but really find spaces where they can work and produce in a different way and also connect to other functions of the city of the future. And that's why, Francesca, you mentioned that we are talking since a long time about possibilities. to create new forms, new typologies of space where you combine a library, a form of classic artistic production, display of art, together with new forms of digital spaces. And we all know that, and that's where the idea of the data center comes in, that data is basically the raw material for governments in the future. And data centers are built outside the city, and the state has basically no interest in taking care of the question of who is collecting data, what is done with data. And I think it would be a great point to discuss if we should rethink typologies like the library, typologies like museum, and typologies like a data center that every city needs, and that cities are hiding, and cities are taking down old quarters to replace them with data centers, but the data center as typology and as a potential basis of a new form of fundament for cultural production and for new forms of societal engagement are not yet discussed. So I think in a building that has an almost magic atmosphere of optimism and futurism, it would be great to take this architecture and the atmosphere of a building like that, which is unique in Europe, I think, and to think about how could we translate this building that was dedicated at the height of capitalist expectations on Berlin as a Congress center, and to redefine this idea of a futurist agora, referring to these new demands and typologies that could emerge from that crisis of the city that has been caused partly also by digitalization and by gentrification. So I think that could be a great way to move forward with that building.
Thanks, Niklas. I might hand that right back over to you, Stefan, because you got some applause when you said this place should not stay in offline status. Berlin is not historically known as a particularly wealthy city, and we heard that Niklas said it really was a shame that Tempelhof was handed off into private hands. I mean, where do you see the room to maneuver for the city of Berlin to keep this space going economically and also in terms of sustainability?
That's the key question if we think about the future, because if you remember, the ICC was shut down in 2014 because of economical reasons, because it was simply too expensive, and maybe it was also, the reason was also a lack of fantasy, what you can do with such a building. As Niklas just said, Berlin is not one of the most wealthy cities in the world. It's quite a poor city. But nevertheless, I think there are opportunities to have an open building. I really like the word togetherness. It's a place of togetherness. And it's a place where people meet and exchange ideas about future and also presence, and have a creative atmosphere. And I think what we should try to do, and that's where I see a solution for the building, it must be an open building for in the first place. I think it only works if it's an open, if there's open access, public access to the building. We have had some really absurd ideas in the last 30 years about the future of the ICC. One of them was having like a shopping mall or like a strip in Las Vegas where people can gamble and crazy things, or like a big hotel. Also a data center. I would like to come back on that one, because quite interesting what you just said. But so what is the plan of Berlin? I'm quite new in this job, and I'm really very ambitious of solving this this drama with this building, which we see now. So the idea is to fix some criteria, not too many, for like a public tender, for an invitation of tenders, because I think should not be politicians or the government who really decide exactly upon a concept. I think there's so much creativity around the world, so much experts who have good ideas about it. So what I like to do is set up some criteria and then see what concepts and ideas will be delivered. And one of the criteria is openness. Another criteria is, of course, having a place for art and culture. There should also be the possibility of organizing congresses like that, people coming together. And we will also need a commercial use of this building because this is a quite expensive building, and I think it's not feasible. It's simply not feasible for the government to pay all of it. I've talked to a couple of people, and not only to Thomas Oberender, who really had a fantastic exhibition last year here, but also to other people who gave me some ideas how things could work. I think there should not be the big bang, a reconstruction of the building. I think a good idea would be like public taking possession of the building step by step. And I think you can make small exhibitions. You can have spaces for artists or do like performance, dance. You can have laboratories for, I don't know, whatever art is possible. You can also have science here. I think the connection with, I don't know how you call it in English, neurology, neurology, or whatever you call it, brain. I think I'm very open to these kinds of concepts. But in the end, it must be also, there must be an economic dimension. People using this building must have at least have the possibility to refinance the costs they have. I think this will never be a building where you earn lots of money. I think, in my opinion, it's not possible, and probably it should not be the wish of Berlin to have that. But coming back to the idea of a data center, if you talk, I would like to have some more information about this, because this is also something which is discussed. Shall we have a big data center here? Up until now, I was always against it, because normally all the data centers which I know are closed shops. The only people working in the data center is security personnel, lots of security personnel. I think this should not be the idea of this building. But if you have different ideas, I'm very open for that.
Basically just mentioned, yeah. I just mentioned the idea of a public data center because it's true what you say, data centers are mostly hidden completely from the public who produces that data. And if we talk about the question of what is the economic foundation of a society, it's more and more data. And so basically data is the biggest treasure. Francesca has worked extensively on that phenomenon, that a society who has no access to data and can't work with the data that a society produces will, on the long run, lose the very possibility of governance. We see it in many fields that many cities are basically deprived of political action because they're so dependent on what private companies are producing in terms of digital products based on the excavation of public data. So I think it's important to, whenever you talk about the future of a society, of togetherness, of the social fabric of a city, you have to take into account that the question whether we will be free to take political decisions is based on the question who has access to data. And that's why Francesca and also I and also Rem Koolhaas, whom we discussed that a lot with, say data has to become a public good and cannot be maneuvered in a Wild West manner. So when somebody proposes this as a data center, of course, the idea should not be to close it down and to just turn that into an aesthetic haven where you look from outside, but where you would have access to knowledge production and also create a space where you understand as a citizen, as a politician, as a scholar coming here what digital sovereignty would mean for a society and what it also would mean for a society if we give up on the idea of owning our data and working with our data ourselves. And I think that's also maybe a point what Francesca did. I think Francesca's work in Barcelona was groundbreaking because she was among the first people to really define a society in the digital age as a society that can use their own data and can use digitalization to produce a different form of city. And maybe you might say a word about that, because I think it's important to understand what this building could become if you look at your work in Barcelona.
I think the point about the data center is more a question of recognizing data and also artificial intelligence as critical infrastructures of our time. And many cities around the world, and he mentions Barcelona because we set out, let's say, a strategy to create maybe one of the first data trust model, a democratic governance model for data for cities, where data can be governed in a democratic way, but also preserving the trust of the citizen, because that's a very important part, that citizens are not trusting very much either the big tech companies with the data or the government owning the data. And we need to show that citizens can be in control of what happens to their data, so how they keep it private, how they share the data, for what they share the data, and with whom. And this is becoming a defining new social contract in the digital age. And by the way, this is also now the foundation of the European Digital Strategy with the EU Data Governance Act and all the, our digital constitutional framework, where we talk about digital sovereignty in a sense that data can really become a public infrastructure on top of which startups, but also creatives and journalists and citizens themselves and new form of businesses and services can be created, but preserving our information self-determination and our fundamental rights. So the idea there is to show that the data center can also be accessible, because that's the idea of access to the data center as a facility of an infrastructure, but basically to learn what is the potential for data in a society, how you can leverage data for the benefit of the city and the people. And this is very concrete use cases, like how you can use, for example, the environmental data, mobility data, to reshape mobility and make it more sustainable. And you can visualize it. I mean, if we would have to speak in the other room, which is a control room, right? Many cities around the world have these control rooms, but they are closed spaces. They are hidden. Maybe there is some kind of security. Maybe the police will have the most sophisticated one. But how about creating it as a public infrastructure, as a place to access knowledge and to recognize the power of shared data, of a data trust, and the potential to use this data to transform our cities. And so you can visualize it, and you can also trust it, because at the end, the governance, the rules to access this data will be determined in a shared agreement, and companies will be part of it, by the way, because rightly so, it was like, what's the economic model? Where companies at the moment are very willing actually to share this data back. I'm running a large-scale experiment with the city of Hamburg on micromobility data, where we are focusing on private to public, private to government data sharing for the public interest. Because, also this data is very important for regulation, so data-driven regulation, but also for decision-making. And companies understand that they need to give it back to who is producing the data, and that there is a win-win, sharing this data to take public decisions. And I think also the creativity that can be unleashed with this data is absolutely critical. So the idea of the data center would be more how to redefine this architecture, which is actually also Rem Koolhaas always says it, maybe the fundamental architecture of our time. The biggest buildings in the world today are data centers, but bring it back to the public and to the democratic decision-making, engaging citizens. And I just want to comment on these two other points that was mentioned. One thing is the engagement of citizens. How do we make those spaces open, but also how citizens can actively participate? So, for example, engaging in decision-making with data, engaging in democratic participation, understanding what the city of Berlin is doing. So a kind of, open governance model. And also new forms of digital learning, like a makerspace. I mean, my idea of the library is similar to what you have in Helsinki, this new form of public library where they have books, but books is only a small part. They have new digital archives, a production center for radio, music, films, and a film archive. And then they have a makerspace where citizens can learn how to, 3D print and the digital skills. And this is like growing. It's bigger because we need to acquire those digital skills and we need to spread them through society. And finally, the collaboration between science, technology, and the arts. Let me say, I think this is absolutely critical. And this is not only, let's put a little bit of art together with tech so it is more fashionable, or let's, put technology into the arts so we have more channels to sell the arts. I mean, this is not the only way. Actually, I think that creativity and culture, because of the kind of groundbreaking input that they have on redefining society, redefining what we need, are really needed for the direction that technology will take in the future. We need to shape this direction. I mean, there is not only one direction, linear direction, where technology is going. Digitization, we don't only have to speed it up, we have to say it's going to be about sustainability, environmental and social sustainability. And the arts and culture are critical to redefine this direction and to discover a new direction, also for the technological, for digitization in society. So this combination, it's one element that I think works pretty important. Yeah.
That's a great point. The needs of a city, of course, change as a city grows, as it perhaps shrinks. We see cities shrink due to deindustrialization, for example. We've seen that here in Europe, in the US, many parts of the world. Stefan, how does that inform how you look at what to do with a space like this and other public spaces when you're aware of the fact that what Berlin might need and want, and what people who live in Berlin might need and want now, might change down the road, 20 years, 30 years down the road?
I think talking about combination of different spheres we have in Berlin. First of all, we have as Niklas Maak said, we have a vibrant, independent artist scene in Berlin, which is very strong and I think which attracts lots of talents coming to Berlin. It's because of the independent artist scene. And on the other hand, we also have a very breathtaking, vibrant scientist ecosystem in Berlin. Not only 250,000 students, but lots of excellent universities and non-academic research institutes. And we have also this startup ecosystem, which is one of the strongest in Europe, probably in the world, if you look at the figures. On the other hand, we have these enormous challenges concerning needs of transformation, digitization, but also energy and climate-related transformation. And I think one of the hurdles in this barriers we have now is that there's not a good functioning interconnection between these different ecosystems. But I think we need that to have a disruption also in the political approach to these challenges. Yeah, we have lots of young people in Berlin who have crazy ideas and who are really facing with an enormous open-minded mindset what should be changed, but we don't really have, and I really believe in places and locations. I think not everything is abstract and can only be done by a good interconnection via a digital infrastructure. I think we still need places where people talk and meet and things just happen and in places. So I think the idea of a combination would be a great idea for this place, yeah, where all these different ecosystems come together. Science is very, very important in Berlin. And I also talk as the senator for economics. I think the only basis for economics or for economic wealth or growth in the city, which we need also to build apartments and to solve also social problems we have. We need economy in Berlin, and as the basis for economy is basically two things. It's arts and culture, and it's science. And if they meet here, that would maybe open completely new perspectives.
Francesca and Niklas, I would ask both of you, how do you see how data can inform how we adapt spaces, actual physical spaces, as Stefan said, as cities grow, expand, or shrink, or have different needs?
Yeah, I mean, there are many examples of how spaces have been reused, starting from the reuse of a church building in Barcelona as a server, they're talking about service, but also many other ways to bring in new content into old buildings. And I think that would be a great chance here to take this occasion to say Berlin has a lot of potential, but this potential doesn't have a space. And we have built a very questionable big new museum in Berlin for the art of the 20th century, and I think it's time to think about a space for the 21st century. And this could just happen here, as part of the 21st century is also acknowledging that we shouldn't build structures like this from scratch while others are standing empty. So Berlin also presents us with the problems and potential solutions to say, after building a Schloss in the middle of the city and building a giant museum for big private collections in another part of the city, to say, okay, what can we do for the citizens of the city to redefine also the relation of the people and power, the relation of, as you say, science, tech, and art in a different way. Because I see in many other cities, and I think Berlin fortunately hasn't made this mistake, that there is an idealization of the idea of the startup of tech. So cities are building huge hubs for the tech scene, and then art is kind of an ornamental decoration that the tech guys are not too bored. If they go home, they can look at some art, and I think that's not what we want. We want a different relation of artists, researchers, and producers of what we call the startup scene. So I think it would be great to avoid this like idealization of startup scenes and say, okay, if we have even a startup, we're in the green zone, we are not. And this could be a great space to relate art, science, and economy in a more sustainable, more humane, and more exciting way than it happens in other cities.
Yeah, exactly. I think a couple of things, closing, I think. The first one is, if you look at innovation and where it happens, today innovation happens in cities. I mean, this we know. It doesn't happen anymore somewhere outside where you have the science hub, which is remote, and where you do technology transfer remotely because it has to be outside of the city. No, today talented people want to go to the cities, and technology transfer happen in the city. So it happened in a different way. And I think this connection between the scientific centers, like the type of Fraunhofer that you have in Germany, which is absolutely excellent science in the world, like leading, and then the transfer of this science and the technological capacity into society, and into society also in the interaction with culture, with arts, kind of changing the possibilities. This is what we need. And I think this will attract talented people. If you ask talented people where they want to go today, what they want to work with on, you know, the challenges they want to solve. Yes, today they're mainly working for big tech companies that work in advertising. So, sorry to say, we're wasting some of the best brains and minds of our times to track eyeballs and do advertising. Why those people? Of course they want to solve, you know, they want to work on climate change, on mobility, on housing, on new forms of living, new forms of public spaces, because those are the greatest challenges of our time. And bringing those things together and having the city and the data of the city, the knowledge, the decision-making power to do things that will have an impact on people's daily life. Maybe using a space like this as a kind of icon for the new Bauhaus of the digital age, I think that that's what we need, and it hasn't happened yet. But there is the need for this space, I think, to exist.
Thank you, Francesca. We've unfortunately come to an end already. Thank you for the thoughtful and reflective discussion about the space and the needs of a city. So Stefan, Francesca, and Niklas, thank you so much for sharing your insights.